Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. It's David Summers, and here comes another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession over 100 years ago. So now, let's step back into the ring and back into time. Let's get wall to wall and treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, Ron, I got to tell you, your Studcast are absolutely on fire. All right, they're being heard now in record numbers. The hidden history lesson, I really love this, you've been doing for the last several months now, that takes fans behind the kayfabe curtain, I think has a lot to do with these record numbers. I can't believe anybody's even breaking kayfabe, especially you. Few, if any, wrestling podcasts do that for fans. And in the last Studcast, you even answered a very personal learning tree question about the inner workings of you and your partner's Southeastern Gulf Coast territory.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd have to say, why not, Dave? You know, I thought the entire last Studcast was an open book, man, to how things work behind the scenes. We're talking about May in 1980 is where we are now, and so starting with the cooperation among many of the Southern Territory owners, that's basically what the last one was about. That kind of led to bigger success, basically for all of us, man, back in the day. So then we had a great example of that cooperation. I got it from Bill Watts in Mid-South. He loaned us his Star, the Junkyard Dog, and then we even finished that last one with an excellent learning tree question about pretty much everything to do with the company's finances.
All right, so where are we going to ride this week? I think you ended last week saying we might hear a little more on your Birmingham, Alabama purchase and how important it was to lots of the future success of not just Southeastern, but Continental Championship Wrestling 5 years later in 1985.
Well, we're going to go there again, man. Maybe this one might be for the last time until we get a little closer to actually opening up Birmingham, which is going to be about 6 months later in November of 1980. And right now we're just at the end of May, getting into the 1st of June just about. And we're also going to be talking about special TV in this one with a surprise guest who ends up changing almost everything on the upcoming card right in the process of doing that this TV. And this TV is going to be a great one, and maybe I think one of the best we've ever done. And it's going to be in the last week of May, 1980, which was the final week of the books, the rating books. And so hopefully we're going to then have time to answer learning tree question at the end of all that.
All right, so the title for this Studcast really caught my eye immediately. This is number 352. Can you believe that? 352 episodes of these Studcasts. All right, so the title is TV Surprise Changes Card, Ron versus Stomper. That's the title. So I can't wait to hear this one. Are we starting with the hidden history lesson regarding the purchase of your largest city ever, Birmingham, Alabama?
Yep, I think that's where we're going to start, man. And But first, before we get into Birmingham, I want to go back to Knoxville for just a little bit to basically explain the major difference between the two southeastern territories. I don't know that I've ever really done that, and why Birmingham was so important once we made the purchase of Birmingham. So Knoxville, my first territory, was basically just a two-market territory. It only had two places that ran every week. Knoxville, and then up there in the northeastern corner of Tennessee, the Tri-City areas of Bristol, Kingsport, and Johnson City, Tennessee. Other than those two that ran every week, Morristown, Tennessee, and Harlan, Kentucky were the only two cities that ran every other week, and they ran on every other Saturday. So everywhere else that we ran were in these smaller cities, and they only got matches about every month or so. So when we got into the southeastern Gulf Coast territory, from one day, we had 5 markets. All of a sudden, everything changed. And they got wrestling every week, 5 of those towns. We were in Pensacola on Sunday. We were in Montgomery on Monday. We were in Mobile on Tuesday. We were in Panama City, Florida on Thursday. And we were in Dothan on Friday nights. And every Saturday night, we were in a smaller city that got its wrestling. So basically, every major territory in the country had at least 6 major markets that had matches each week. And if you didn't have a territory that had 6 towns that you could go to every week, you were in a very small territory. Knoxville was that. But Gulf Coast is a little different situation. Some of the largest territories, they even ran 2 cities a night. Knoxville had only 2 towns that we ran regularly. Gulf Coast had 5 until we added Birmingham. This is where Birmingham became a different animal for us. So not only did Birmingham fill that 6-city slot, it was the largest city by far in either of those southeastern territories. And its purchase basically put us in a category of being finally a major territory. So by filling that 6-city slot, it also allowed us to run a 7th smaller city, if we wanted to, along the Gulf Coast, somewhere close to home, which would give our wrestlers the opportunity for an added payoff each week, to give them a little bit bigger check at the end of the week if we needed to, or if we wanted to.
Yeah, cool deal. I never really thought about the significance of having a 6th weekly city making any territory a major one, but that really makes sense. Pensacola usually ran on a Sunday, so the only night of the week you had open was a Saturday night. I mean, to me, was Saturday night not potentially the best night of the week for wrestling?
Good point. I mean, it definitely was, Dave. It was the best night of the week, and everywhere. For people wanted to go out and do things on Saturday night, but it was harder to get a major building on a Saturday night because those buildings were always looking out for themselves, and everybody wanted a Saturday night, so they didn't want to commit to you to give you every Saturday night, because they might end up turning down some big events that they could get. So in the first week of 1982, because we were doing very well and the Florida Territory's crowds had dropped some, we made agreement with the Florida Territory. They had run Tallahassee for years. They owned their own building there, as a matter of fact. And so they could have matches. Their matches were on Friday nights. So we already had a town on Friday night, which, I think you might be familiar with that one.
Yeah. I think you're talking about Dothan's night. That was always on a Friday night.
It was finally made a deal with the building. It took us a while to find a town that would run on a Friday night. And oddly enough, man, and I think you know what city that was, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I remember, from literally as a kid on Friday nights at the Houston County Farm Center in Dothan, Alabama, and walking around the back and running into the incredible Andre the Giant and looking up at what I thought was 10 feet tall. All right, but it is coming back to me. That was when Dothan had always wrestled on Friday night and then changed that to Saturday. All right, so I remember when you switched the nights, wrestling suddenly became even bigger.
Yeah, it certainly did, and that was my idea, Dave. I thought that, if we could get the right town on a Saturday night, wow, it would give us a great 6-day schedule. And Dothan was a fantastic wrestling town. It had always been on Friday. But I remember when we switched the nights to a Saturday, it suddenly became bigger than ever.
And in my mind's eye, it's so larger than life because I remember it was Friday night. Are we going to wrestling? Are we going to wrestling? And seeing some of those characters and people like Andre the Giant and Don Carson and all of those who wrestled at the Houston County Farm Center on Friday night. But I remember it well because I used to have to wait a week after the TV show aired on Saturdays to see the matches live the next Friday. But I thought this was so cool. When it changed to Saturday night, the wrestling TV show went off about 5 or 6 p.m. 2 hours later was the big event live at the Farm Center in Dothan rather than having to wait a week. I mean, to me, that was another really cool, just basically a really smart decision, Stud.
Well, man, thanks, but... and then obviously, it did make a great deal of difference. I mean, fans just see that TV, they're eager to see the live event, and the live events coming 2 hours later. Mm-hmm. It's like a no-brainer. It just turned out to be a magnificent thing. So let's get back to Birmingham. It had always been, for maybe 30 years, Birmingham's night was always a Monday. And it was a much bigger and better market than Montgomery, where we were at this point when we bought Birmingham. That was Montgomery's night. But we didn't hesitate to switch Montgomery's night because Birmingham was going to be such a hoss for us, biggest city that we'd ever had, and in a great building. So we obviously kept Monday for Birmingham, switched Montgomery over to Wednesday nights. Mm-hmm. And Birmingham was going to be huge for us. We had no idea. And basically, it got a great start from the very beginning, but it wasn't going to reach its full potential until about 5 years later, in 1985. And in that summer, Southeastern, we changed Southeastern's name from Southeastern to CCW, Continental Championship Wrestling. And it was where we did the first ever remote with TV trucks. We brought in these TV trucks and parked them in the alleyway there, Boutwell Auditorium. We shot the show instead of 3 cameras with 5 cameras. One of them handheld that just roamed all over the building. And we put together a TV show that had all the bells and whistles, man. And we recorded the first ever weekly TV show live from a major arena, man, with 6,000 or more fans. Mm-hmm. So wow. Televised wrestling changed forever in that moment. We didn't really realize, but we were the first to do it. And the day of the small studios and the tiny sets and the 3 cameras and the bleachers that maybe held 150 or 200 people, those days were going to be gone. Our production quickly became the talk of the industry, beginning with Gordon Soley, who I hired as the commentator, and he was the first guy to be totally blown away by it. I mean, first night, Gordon was like, "Wow, Ron, this is unbelievable." He had never been. They used to record in Tampa in a studio that maybe held 400 people, but and we had 7,000 his first night. It was like, gosh almighty, man, we're stars, right? So within 2 years, the show was on in 20 American markets. And we were worldwide. We were in Saudi Arabia. We were in Qatar. Continental had grown to be much larger than the original size of both the Southeastern territories. And it was in 8 states at that time. And from the Gulf Coast, we went almost all the way to Ohio. And many of its original wrestlers had basically moved from Pensacola to Birmingham because of its size, the city's size, and because it was so much closer to those northern cities than the Knoxvilles and up into the Kentucky where we were going. So they wanted to locate themselves in the middle of the territory. And the territory had expanded dramatically.
Oh, no doubt. Truly remarkable growth. And anyone that ever saw a Continental Wrestling TV show had to recognize what they were watching was probably one of the best TV wrestling shows ever done. This has been, as always, a very enlightening and historic look back at the sport, and I enjoyed it a lot, this hidden history thing. All right, so can you set up the great card for Mobile, the last Tuesday in May? Let's go back to 1980.
Okay, I can certainly do that. Before I do, though, I need to explain that this original card, the card that I'm going to give you now, was the card that we put together expecting to run that on the last Tuesday in May in 1980. And but I'm going to be announcing some significant changes that were made on this card.
Okay,
due to the television.
All right, but I mean, that was unusual. Why did the card change?
Well, the TV had for it, it got a surprise visit. We got a surprise visit from the Southeastern Commissioner, Don Curtis. It was on the last Saturday in May of 1980, and had some very unusual things that happened during the course of the TV show that required a change of not just the card that we had put together, but also the TV itself. So I'm going to give everyone the original card now. After we discussed the TV show, then I will give them the updated version and the card that actually ran.
All right, that's a great way to get our attention. The TV shows lately had all been really, really good. This was supposed to have a United States Junior Heavyweight Championship match on it. I can't wait to hear what happened for Don Curtis to change the upcoming card during the TV show. When you make changes like that in the middle of a TV show, you never know what's going to happen and how that's going to work out in timeout as far as time goes in a TV show. So what was the original card for all 3 major Southeastern cities the last week of May 1980?
Well, last show was a great show we had. We had with, the star, the Junkyard Dog from the Mid-South Territory, and we had 5 main events. Well, this one is another one with 5 main events, and I think this one may be actually even better than the last one. And on the original card for the opening match in the arenas was Charlie Cook against the new Cuban Assassin. The second match was the first of 5 main events. It was a loser leaves Southeastern match between Don Fargo and Dick Steinborn. Then in the second main event, because of what happened the week before, and a 30-minute time limit match that ended up in a draw with Tony Charles defending his championship against Norvell Austin, that match was going to be coming back again. And this time it was going to be an hour time limit. In the third main event, Eddie Boulder was scheduled to get a Southeastern Championship match against the Mongolian Stomper, who was managed by the Big C. In the fourth main event was going to be the new Southeastern Tag Champions, Randy Rose and Dr. Bill Irwin, managed by the Big C, defending against former champions, which was Rob and I. And then in the last main event, it was going to be a special 2 out of 3 falls match, which we didn't do very often at all. Mm-hmm. Bob Armstrong was going to be going up against Cowboy Ron Bass, managed by the Big C.
All right, another really fantastic card, about as good as the last card with the Junkyard Dog and everybody else that was on it. All right, so I don't know how this last-minute new card that was made by Don Curtis during the TV show was going to get any better than the one you just gave us. All right, so can we begin with the TV show before we get to our break?
Yeah, man, I don't see why not. So in my opinion, it was going to be one of the best TV shows ever done in Southeastern history. And I'm talking about the second version of it, once Curtis came in and things started to change. So Don Curtis showed up about 10 minutes before we actually started taping the show. Nobody expected him. He just popped in. Here I am. And so Charlie Platt took him out on the opening of the show. And after a brief welcome for his surprise visit, and Charlie announced that the last championship match of the month was going to be the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship. We'd had three championship matches in the three previous weeks, and that this was going to be the first match on the TV show. Was going to be our boy Tony Charles defending his United States Junior Heavyweight Championship. And that worked out well, leading up to big pop from the studio Guardians right away from the very start of the show. We're going to open up with the championship match. So then Charlie and Don Curtis were on the set, and Tony Charles went to the ring, had his championship belt on, got a big roar from the TV crowd, and everyone was met by the second then surprise of the show. Charlie didn't announce who he was going to be wrestling, who Charles was going to be wrestling, and second out of the dressing room comes Norvell Austin, going to be wrestling Tony Charles. Well, he is booked to wrestle him in the upcoming week, but, he's going to get the championship shot on TV that day. And so that was a big surprise for everybody, along with what had already kind of gone down there. So right before, no one expected that we were going to get Curtis to show up. And now, things are really happening. But the show was off to a pretty darn good start, obviously. So the studio, like Tony Charles, they were voicing their objections. They booed Norvell like crazy. They didn't expect to see Norvell get this championship match on television.
Right.
So, and it got much louder as he was announced as the challenger. And so, like I said, things were kind of off to a rowdy start. So as soon as the bell rang, Don Fargo steps out of the dressing room, and he takes up a spot right next to the ring. So, now the Charles and Austin, he got their attention right off the bat. They're looking at him like, what the heck is this all about? The match had just began. And then from the front of the building where all the fans used to come in to sit on the bleachers, here came Dick Steinborn. And he went straight to the set. He said, I'm sure, he was surprised to see Don Curtis sitting there with Charlie. But it didn't stop him from getting into Curtis big time about why is Norvell getting this title shot on television? It's this is my shot. I'm the guy that ought to be getting this shot. What the heck is going on here? Why am I not getting it? So Fargo was making that same argument basically to the crowd about, hey, if I should be up there, it should be me.
All this was going on at the same time. The match was going on in the ring. Yeah.
It was a little bit of a cluster here, man. What's going on here? So, and it continued until Norvell, toward the end of the match, he hit Tony Charles with a diving headbutt coming off the ropes, and he covered him, man. Looked like he was gonna be the next champion. So Don Fargo, he's been out there the whole time, walking around and around the ring. Well, he sees that that Norvell's about to win the title. He jumps right in the ring, stomps Norvell in the back, starts putting the boots to him, and then Steinborn's still sitting there with the commissioner, and he just gets up and goes in the ring, and he gets involved with the two of them. And now you got three guys fighting, and Tony just rolled out, took his belt, and went to the dressing room. That was the end of that part of it. But wow, the three in the ring, they were at it for a little bit, for darn sure.
All right. So what was Don Curtis and Charlie doing at the set? What was happening there?
Well, it was a shame that Curtis, had never wrestled in the Gulf Coast territory or in Southeastern. Fans didn't know anything much about Don Curtis's history. Fans had no idea, basically, that he was, in my estimation, he was legitimately one of the toughest wrestlers and one of the best athletes in all of sports, man. And he was respected by everybody that ever met him, man. He was a class act. And at first, now Curtis is seeing this, he's just getting there, and then all of a sudden he's got two guys that aren't supposed to be anywhere near the ring, or up there in the ring, and you got three guys fighting each other, and I guess Curtis was kind of shocked at what he was seeing, probably because he couldn't believe these guys have a lot of nerve. He had to be thinking, well, these guys got to have a lot of nerve to do this right here in front of me. Right? So he went to the ring in the middle of all of it. I mean, he got in the ring, he grabbed them, he threw them out of the ring one at a time. It was like he cleaned the ring real quick like. And so Fargo went into the dressing room, and Steinborn left the studio, and Norvell Austin went out the back exit. He left the studio too. So Don Curtis went back to the set, and I'm telling you, he was an angry man, I guess is a good way of putting it. And so he asked Charlie, he says, do you have a copy of the format for the rest of this TV show? And so Charlie always kept the format there.
Yeah.
He slid it over there to him. He said, and basically the format was a basic diagram that you use to set up how the show's going to go, who's going to be on the matches, when are they there, where's the interviews, who's on the interviews. Yeah, so Charlie passed the format to him, and he cut away to a commercial break.
I'll tell you what, that's how you open a TV show right there. If you want them to stay, make it unpredictable. All right, so what was he going to do? Well,
during the break and the next match too, he's Curtis back there in the dressing room, and he's changing the rest of the whole TV show, and much of the upcoming card that was already booked. So it was getting crazy.
All right, so I tell you what, this is really interesting. I've never heard anything like this, and this was just the end of the first TV match. There's literally the show couldn't have been on 8 or 10 minutes. All right, so let's take our break right here. And when we come back with the second TV segment, that's going to be when this Studcast returns right here. Stay with us. Okay, Studcast fans, breaking news. Ron is going to be returning to the Ozark, Alabama Civic Center Saturday, January 13th, 2024 for a special wrestling event. See some of the best new wrestling talent in the area going at it. Ron is going to be meeting and greeting fans when the doors open and on into the event. He'll be bringing fans souvenirs of all kinds, 8x10 photos, Southeastern t-shirts for only $10, and his own t-shirts. His thrilling novel, Brutus, autographed personally to you for only $20. Selfies with him or you alone with his beautiful USA Championship belt for only $5 and much more. We'll see you in Ozark, July 13th, 2024. Okay, Studcast fans, welcome back in. It is another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud Ron Fuller, episode number 352. It's called TV Surprise, Changes Card, and Ron versus Stomper. All right, so I don't even remember any TV show that started like this one. I watched most all of these shows as a youngster or a young man. I can't wait to hear what Don Curtis had in mind after all this wild start to this TV show. Set it up for us, Stud.
Well, he didn't make any changes in the new TVs in the next TV segment. Because he didn't have the time to do it, obviously, because he only had a little break there between the first and the second match. But everything after that, he was going to totally change during the course of this second segment. He's going to totally change the rest of the show's format. including a lot of the card that was going to go into the arena. So the second TV match was with the new Southeastern Tag Champions, Randy Rose and Dr. Bill Irwin. They had finally managed to win the Southeastern Tag Championship from Rob and I because of Big C. We'll talk a little bit about that one later. And they were going to be making their first appearance as tag champions on this television show. But first, Rob and I were at the set, and we watched how the Big C stole the belts from us in a no disqualification match a few days earlier. And the video showed the Big C, because it was a no disqualification match, it just showed him stroll in the ring. Robert had Irwin pinned. The match was basically over. The Big C just strolls in the ring like he's, taking a little walk somewhere. And he loaded up his black glove and he nailed Rob with it in the back of the head. And in plain sight of the referee standing there watching him, right? And because it was a no DQ match, he just left the ring, and Irwin rolled over on top of Rob, and what's the referee going to do? It's a no disqualification match. He couldn't disqualify him, so he counted Rob out, and they won the belts that way. So Rob and I, we watched that, and then we stayed at the set with Charlie, and we watched the new champions. They were in this second match. And I have to say, man, Dr. Bill Irwin and Randy Rose, they look like tag champions in some of the best territories I ever saw in the world. I mean, these two young guys, they were headed for greatness, man. It didn't take them long either to show that fact, man. And the Big C, he couldn't wait to get in the ring and raise his champion's hands, man, with victory. He was walking on cloud nine.
All right, so who and what was on the personality profile?
Well, at this point, Don Curtis had kind of finished making his changes, and so he had totally changed everything, like I said, and so he told Charlie that I'm not going to need you for the personality profile, and that was the first time that had ever happened. I mean, Charlie handled all the profiles, and he said, I'm going to handle things from here. I'll handle this personality profile. And then he had already sent, and he had them track down Steinborn and the culprits in the first match, Norvell, Austin, and Fargo. And so he had the three of them on the personality profile with him as the commentator, And so he had intended, usually it was a pretty casual affair. They would sit down in chairs for the profile, and they would discuss things. His profile was totally different, and he intended for it to be that way. You could tell when he was doing it. And it was all because of what had happened in the first TV match right there in front of him, right? They made him look like a fool, kind of, right? So he had nobody sitting down, and it said. So he had Don Fargo and Norvell Austin and Dick Steinborn all standing with their backs to the profile set, and he was standing facing them. The cameras, all three of them, were behind his back, right? They just got their shot from around him. You could see his back, and you could hear the discussion going on between him and the three guys. And they look like three convicts at a trial, man. They were like, oh, my gosh, what is this all about, right? So he let him know right off the bat who was in charge, man, right from the very beginning, And he started out with Fargo and Steinborn, who had been causing him basically problems for weeks. They had done all these run-ins, and they were just doing crazy things trying to get the belt from Tony Charles. And so he started with them, and he told them that he said, you guys have caused me a lot of problems. He said, I'm going to finish my problems with you guys once and for all, right now. So he said, because of what happened in the beginning of this TV show, he said, you're scheduled the match you were supposed to have with a loser leave town against each other. That match is gone. And he said to Norvell Austin, he says, and your shot, Norvell Austin, at the United States Championship against Tony Charles, it's gone too. And then he said, that he said somebody else is going to get your match, Norvell. And then he hung them. They all hung their heads, man, and the studio crowd loved it because he was really he was mad, and they could tell it. So he got himself a big pop. And then he said, we've had such a great reaction from the Southeastern fans about this 3-man championship match that we had just a week or so ago, right? Which was Tony Charles and Fargo and Steinborn, all three in that 3-man match. And he says, I've decided we're going to have another one of those 3-man matches. And he says, this one is going to be with the 3 of you guys against each other. And the studio popped again, right? So, and then he says, but the results of this one, he says, is going to be very different than the first one. So everybody's real quiet. Now he's got everybody's attention. And so then he says, the results of this 3-man match, he says, is going to be different than the last one. He says, the winner of this match is going to get a shot at the United States Junior Heavyweight Champion. And then he says, but he says the 2 losers, he says both of the 2 losers are going to be leaving Southeastern.
Uh-oh.
two at a time, right?
Right.
2 in 1 match, right? Leaving, you're gone. And so the studio audience exploded in cheers because they're all 3 heels. They don't care if all of them are gone. So the 3 wrestlers, they exploded, man. They're like, whoa, wait, they're all there, and he just turned and walked away. That was the end of the profile, right? They're arguing and pushing and shoving, and we went to black before the next match.
As the commissioner slowly walks away. Enough said. All right, that's a great way to solve that problem. Those 3-man matches were really great for fans, and this one was going to send 2 wrestlers out of the territory in the same night. All right, so who was in the next match?
Well, the next match was the reason Don Curtis actually came there to begin with. And he lived in Jacksonville, Florida, so he drove across I-10 there and came to the studio. And he came because of this guy that was coming back into the territory. And this guy had become a star, man. He had been there two times for sure over a period of 2 years there. And wow, he was really loved by the fans, And he hadn't been there for 5 months. He had been there 5 months earlier, and he left the territory. And that wrestler was going to end up taking Norvell Austin's shot at the United States Junior Heavyweight Champion Tony Charles.
Okay, so all right, and who was it, Stud?
It was. Well, like I said, one of the most popular stars in Southeastern Gulf Coast history, Jerry Stubbs, future Mr. Olympia.
I love him. All right, wow. All right, so this upcoming card really was changing in more ways than one. Did the fans know Stubbs was back? Who was in that 3rd TV match?
Yeah, the fans had no idea Stubbs was even in the building, man. So... and then all of a sudden, 3rd match, they ring the bell, and out comes Jerry Stubbs. So, wow, the studio went crazy, like, whoa, Jerry Stubbs is here, man. And Jerry, like he always did, he was so loved by fans, but he loved the fans too. He didn't go straight to the ring; he went straight to the bleachers, and he crawled up in the bleachers with the fans and patting them. They were all over him and patting him on the back, and so. So it was, he looked great. He was in the best shape of his career. And those fans were standing the entire match that Stubbs had. And Tony Charles even went to the set while the match was on. And everybody loved Stubbs. And Tony loved him, too, because, they were both buddies. They made trips together for years. Mm-hmm. So, he went to say his little deal. Hey, I love seeing Stubbs back. This is great, And so, and that ends up going to be his opponent. and he's the guy that's going to take Norvell's place. Jerry Stubbs is going to wrestle Tony Charles for the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship on that next card.
Okay, Ron, you were absolutely right about this TV being special. So how did it end?
Well, the ending was pretty special in itself. Big Ron Bass and the Big C came into the ring for the last match, and they paraded around the ring. Their opponent wasn't in the ring. And after they were introduced, no opponent was still there. Big C goes over and grabs the microphone from the TV announcer's hand, and he says, basically, my big Texan here is willing to take on anybody back there in that dressing room. Come on down, somebody, and get some of it, right? So he was being a real smart aleck, as a Big C Carson was always.
Yeah.
And so out of the dressing room comes running Bob Armstrong. He goes straight in the ring, and he starts kicking butt. And then the studio went crazy. And they were so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. I mean, they were just, it had been a big show already, and it's just getting bigger. And so Bob was doing his job on the big Texan, and Stomper's back in the dressing room, and he sees this, and he's like, well, I got to do something. So he comes charging into the ring, and both of them get Bob down. They're putting the boots to him, and Big C's up on the apron, and they're cheering him on. And I was back there with Rob, and I kept remembering, it came to my mind about something Bob had said a couple of times, that, now Big C had these two big men, and he wished he could take care of both of them if he could. And I saw what was going on, and I decided, man, it's time that I go out there and I'm going to back up Bob. And it had already been a tremendous TV show, and it ended in total pandemonium. I mean, the last interview then was me and Bob and Rob and Eddie Boulder. And so here was some of the new card that had been pieced together that Curtis had been working on. He had swapped me from being partners with Rob in the championship match for the tag team championship to putting Eddie Boulder partners with Rob, and they were going to be wrestling against the Big C's guys of Rose and Irwin, and I was going to be taking Eddie's place and wrestling the Stomper for the Southeastern championship. So Rose and Irwin and I, we promised, Bob and I, at the end of this, we promised each other, man, that we're going to watch each other's backs, not just for this next card, but from now on, we're not going to let Big C and his guys do just whatever they wanted to. And, so it was going to be one of the biggest cards in the history of the business at that time.
You are not kidding. I absolutely agree. This might have been the best TV show so far. All right, I couldn't keep up with all the changes made in the card during this TV show. So give us that new complete card with all the changes for the last week in May of 1980.
Well, the opening match was the only match that was still the same, basically, and it was still Charlie Cook versus the Cuban Assassin. And there were still 5 main events on the card, and the first of the main events was a new match. The United States Junior Heavyweight Championship match, Tony Charles was now going to be defending against Jerry Stubbs. The second main event was a totally new match. It was a 3-man match between Norvell Austin, Don Fargo, Dick Steinborn. The winner was going to get a shot at the U.S. Junior Champion, and the 2 losers were both going to have to leave Southeastern. Then in the third main event, which was a new match, it was for the Southeastern Tag Championship. You had the champions, Randy Rose and Dr. Bill Irwin, managed by Big C. They were going to be wrestling against Robert and Eddie Boulder. Mm-hmm. And the fourth match was a new match. It was for the Southeastern Championship belt. The Mongolian Stomper, managed by Big C, was going to be defending against me. And the fifth one was the only match, basically, besides the first one, that was the same as this first card started out being. And that was going to be the 2 out of 3 falls challenge match between Bob Armstrong and Ron Bass, managed by the Big C.
Okay, so I think this card was maybe even better than last week's card. So what happened in these big matches?
Charlie Cook, he beat the Cuban Assassin. Tony Charles and Jerry Stubbs had a classic, clean wrestling match. I watched it. It was 30-minute time limit. Wow, it was unbelievable. The whole building standing up. Not one punch was thrown. They shook hands with each other consistently throughout the match. Wow, it was unbelievable. Tremendous match, 30-minute draw. Norvell Austin won the 3-man match. So that gave him a future shot at the United States Junior Heavyweight Champion. And that was Tony Charles. He did not lose to Stubbs, so, he was probably going to get that shot the next week. Both Don Fargo and Dick Steinborn lost, and both of them left Southeastern Wrestling. It was the first time ever in Southeastern that two men that wasn't a team had to leave town from the same match in the same match. Pretty crazy. Southeastern tag match ended with the Big C getting his team disqualified to save their belts. And then the next match, in a similar fashion, the Big C got himself DQ'd in my championship match against the Stomper to save the Stomper's belt. Then the last match, man, was a hard-fought one, man, between Bass and Armstrong. They split winners of the first two falls. Mm-hmm. Bass won the first one. Armstrong won the second one. The third fall was all about Bob, man. I mean, he was all over Bass. Bass had that huge body, and it became kind of obvious, man, by the time they were 30, 40 minutes into this match that Bass was running out of gas. And the Big C had managed, to not get himself in the fray, basically, earlier in the program, and be able to still get his men disqualified in the first two championship matches. But that didn't happen for him in this one. He tried to get the disqualification to go down, and Bob got his hands on Big C. And wow, he was tearing him up. So, Bass, he already had Bass. Bass is laying there. He's gassed. He's done. Big C is getting it now, and the Mongolian Stomper came to his rescue. And so Bass and the Stomper got on Bob, both of them again. And so, true to our promise that me and Bob made at the end of the TV show, I told him I was going to watch his back. And so I went down, man, and me and Bob cleaned the ring. So it was the last 3 matches of the night were all of them pretty darn good ones, man.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, it sounds like a really big night for the fans, but maybe an even better one coming in the next Studcast. I've never heard of 3 Texas death matches on one card. So how about the attendance in the 3 major cities?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me just a little bit about that Texas death match and 3 matches. The next card was, because of the way this one ended, with basically 2 disqualifications on the end to save 2 titles, and then this big smiles with everybody in there on the end of all of that. We're just going to bring back those same 3 matches, but this time we're going to have Texas death match rules. Yeah. 3 straight matches in a row, the last 3 matches of the night. Never done that before.
Wow. Okay.
So the crowds were big, obviously. I mean, it was a great TV show. It was a tremendous TV show. Montgomery was still up there close to 5,000, did 4,800. Dothan was 5,000 people. Mobile, we were back in Expo Hall, so we couldn't put in more than 5,600, and that's all we could get in the building. No telling how many didn't get in the building that were standing outside. But still, it was a great week for those 3 cities.
And I'm obviously a little partial to Dothan as a market. Dothan was a small town, literally, back then, versus Montgomery or Mobile. And I understand now, and as a kid, they would say, oh, Dothan is a hotbed for wrestling. I never understood what that meant, but when Dothan's putting in 5,000, more than Montgomery, and almost as many as Mobile, I certainly understand now. Still an absolute great week, as you said, for those cities. All right, you were really doing great for towns that small compared to Miami and Tampa, for example, in the Florida territory. Their crowds were sometimes not as large as yours. And listen, we're at a point now in the show, I'm happy to say it looks like we're going to have time for a learning tree question. So let's go with that, Stud. All right, this one comes from a lady named Charlotte Davis who lives in Florence, Alabama. And Charlotte says, I loved your Continental Wrestling. I live in Florence, Alabama, in the northern part of the state. I remember around 1985 when your wrestling matches finally came here. My question is why, if you bought Birmingham and northern Alabama in 1980, did it take so long for you to start having matches here? And I'm assuming she's talking about Florence. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question, Ms. Davis. And I guess I owe you an apology in a way, but it had to do with having to drive every trip for wrestlers, and we were based basically in Pensacola, down there on the Gulf, and the distance just from Pensacola to Birmingham was about 250 miles one way, and then if you went on to Florence, you were going to go 350, close to 400 miles one way to get up to Florence, and if you wrestled there, you were going to come back. Florence, it wasn't just one city. It was up there in basically an area where there were three cities. It was Florence and Sheffield, Muscle Shoals, Alabama. It was a little tight area. It kind of was like the Tri-Cities in Tennessee with Kingsport, Johnson City, and Bristol. Same type of situation. Three cities are within 20 miles of each other, and pretty good sized cities. So when we bought Birmingham in 1980, it became the longest trip for our Southeastern Gulf Coast territory, which we started in 1978. So all of a sudden, now we got a 250-mile trip that we never had. And quite honestly, Charlotte, I think your name was, our wrestlers were spoiled. And they were spoiled with short trips. And, considering most territories had a lot longer trips than 250 miles, like the one to Birmingham. So it was our longest one. From 1980 to 1985, the trip from Pensacola to Birmingham was the longest trip that our wrestlers had to make. So when we started Continental Wrestling, that expanded the size of our territory dramatically. In fact, it went from Alabama now almost to Ohio. So, it changed the game, basically.
Wow.
So, and I think the lady mentioned seeing us in Florence, Alabama, about 350 miles from Pensacola in 1985. Well, that's when we started Continental Championship Wrestling in 1985. We expanded the territory dramatically, and suddenly we became one of those huge territories, like the Bill Watts Mid-South and like the Crockett's Mid-Atlantic territory, where trips maybe were sometimes 500 or more miles one way from Charlotte. So, and that was the same case. You were living in Oklahoma and you were working towns in Mississippi. I mean, if you were in the Mid-South. So, I mean, we became big, and that's when we decided we were going to go to all these towns like Florence. I guess that's the best way I can explain it to you, ma'am. And I got to say this. I remember your city well, man. There were some great fans in that part of the country, and they always filled the building there. Every time we went, they always sold out. Fans got turned away. And I'm sorry it took us so long to get there and with our first matches. I guess that's the only excuse I have. But I'm sorry about that being the way it was, but that is.
All right, and I want to ask you about this, and I think I do remember you said most of your guys lived in the Pensacola area, right?
Right.
All right, but so you can't get any farther south because you would be in the water in the Gulf of Mexico. But the one thing maybe you had going for you was Interstate 65. Did you guys go from Pensacola over to the Mobile area and then up 65 to Montgomery, Birmingham, and eventually into the Florence area?
We didn't actually go. You would take Interstate 10 to do that and get over to 65.
Right.
But thankfully, there was a little bit of a shortcut. You could go directly north of Pensacola and hit at 65 about 50 miles north of Mobile.
Okay. All right.
So it saved you about 75 miles without going to Mobile and then catching 65.
One thing I know for sure, if you leave Dothan and you go to Nashville, that's definitely a 6-hour drive. So you had some long drives on these if you were going up into North Alabama.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you couldn't get to Florence on the freeway.
Right. And you still had to cross the entire Gulf panhandle of Florida before you even got into Alabama.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you still, that was still a lot. It reminds me of what you talked about in your Knoxville territory, and you guys had a lot of traveling to do there, especially if you were leaving Pensacola and going back to Knoxville to get into work. Listen, I'll tell you what, Stud, this has been another great Studcast. The TV show is absolutely phenomenal. So how about next week? How do you top it? Where do we ride next week?
Well, we're going to have a new hidden history lesson next week that's going to cover what very few podcasts do, man. Like what we've been doing, basically going behind the scenes of every territory and the promotions of them. And we're also going to be heading into June of 1980, which was summertime, man. That was the best time of the year for wrestling everywhere across the country. We couldn't do much better because the buildings were already full. I mean, we couldn't. We weren't going to be able to push our crowds much larger unless we were getting into Mobile's main arena more often. So we're coming into a great time of year. Territory's literally on fire. And next week's card is going to, like I mentioned just a little bit earlier, it's going to have those 3 great main events on it. Mm-hmm. Something that I don't know that had ever been done in the sport before. Last 3 matches on a major card, all 3 are going to be Texas death matches.
Wow.
So hopefully we'll also get another learning tree question next week, too.
I tell you what, this is so much fun being behind the curtain, being backstage, per se, to understand what's happening and the kind of information. I don't think you're going to get anywhere else the behind-the-scenes story of what in the world is going on in wrestling way back then. Hey, folks, you know the deal. If you want to hook up with Ron, you can do that. You can talk to Ron on Facebook. Go to Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Like and follow him there. Automatically become friends with a legend. If you put comments, I notice often Ron answers all those comments, so you can check him out on Facebook. Also, Twitter, now known as X, Ron Fuller Welch. Follow him there also. I think all the posts that are on Facebook are duplicated over on Twitter, called X now. Listen, and the fantastic website, got to mention that, tnstud.com, tnstud.com. This Studcast is going to be there with every Studcast ever done. Shop the Stud Store, where you can get 43 super Studcast. I think number 1 starts off with the legendary, and I mean a legendary story, 3 hours worth, about Andre the Giant. 4 different 8x10 photos available there. His thrilling lion novel, Brutus, personally autographed to you, and T-shirts are still on sale at the Christmas price of $15.99, and all with free shipping. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's called Southeastern Rewind. It's the first thing that pops up when you go to YouTube. Put in Southeastern Rewind. You'll find it very easily. You will find hundreds of hours of classic old school wrestling entertainment, 427 total videos. the last 131 Studcast, 16 Ask the Stud shows, and 115 short rides with the stud. Go back 1 year or more and discover fantastic stud stories about worldwide stars. 23 Studcast archive stories. 23 Tell Me More fan question shows. Superstars of the past shows, and so much more. That's YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. It is the best deal in wrestling. Okay, any last thoughts, Ron?
Well, man, I just want to thank listeners, as always, for joining us. And I hope they've enjoyed it. And I hope you tell your friends about it. Please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC. Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.